In the United States, 70% of students, when they go to college, so these are the students who do everything right. They're graduating from high school, they decide to go to college, 70% of them have to take remedial math. And it's not that they're not bright. It's not that they didn't necessarily have good teachers. It's just that they were forced along, and just the gaps forced them to essentially pattern match things so that they really didn't understand what they were doing.
By way of introduction, for those just in case if you haven't met Sal before or come across his work, he was founder of the Khan Academy. And in figures, I think 2006, it was a kind of sparkle in your eyes as it started. By 2009, you were up to about 100,000 views. By 2010, Bill Gates was on the phone and Google were on the phone offering to donate and get it going. By 2022, I believe you're over 2 billion views now, 100 million subscribers. The numbers are absolutely phenomenal. 190 countries, all continents, and then every type of community within that, right from the deprived communities, the really struggling refugee type camps and things like that, onwards right the way through to ultimately changing education systems. And I love this motto that you set up there: free world-class education for anyone, anytime. And the biggest joy in life is learning. So you're here at the World Education Summit, where we put learning central right into the eye of everyone and say, look, this is the most important element within the whole lot. And I love this optimism for what's possible. So what I'm going to ask you is, where did that vision come from? Where was the dream? You know, how did it start and how did it become a reality, in brief?
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
The detail.
Well, you know, there was how it started, and then there was, I guess, maybe where the seeds for the vision came from. It got started, as you alluded to a little bit. You know, 2004, I was a newly minted MBA. I was working as an analyst at a hedge fund, but it just came out of conversation. I had family visiting me from New Orleans, which is where I was born and raised. And my 12-year-old cousin was having trouble in math. And because of that, she was put into a slower math track. So I offered to tutor her remotely. When she went back to New Orleans, I was in Boston. And I started doing that, and it worked. And slowly, I became what I call a tiger cousin. I called up her school. I asked, hey, can Nadia retake that placement exam? They let her. Then she went from being in a slow track to a kind of advanced track. So then I started tutoring her younger brothers. Word spreads in my family that free tutoring is going on. And before I know it, there's 10, 15 cousins, family, friends all over the world, all over the country that I was tutoring at the time. And I started writing software for them. I saw a common pattern that it wasn't the content that was difficult, and it wasn't that they weren't bright. It was that they had gaps in their knowledge, especially in math, that they had accumulated over time, and it was coming back to bite them. They were in an algebra class, but they never really mastered exponents or negative numbers. So the software was giving them as much practice as they need. I happened to call it Khan Academy. The domain name was available, and it was kind of my little family academy. I had some, I guess you could say, at the time seemed like delusions, but some of it has come true, which is like, hey, well, maybe if this is useful for my 15 cousins, maybe this could be useful for more people. And I kind of dreamt maybe creating an online academy, which back in 2005, 2006 seemed, you know, not realistic. But I kept doing that. A friend suggested that I make videos to complement the software. I actually thought it was a silly idea at first, but I thought, why not try it? I uploaded them onto YouTube as a way to just store the videos and make them accessible to my cousins. It was clear that they said that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. That they liked, I think they liked me, but they liked having an on-demand version of me even more, and not having to feel embarrassed if they had to review something, or to be able to have it on demand or review it in the middle of the night. And many other folks started to discover it as well who are not my cousins. And so, to your point, by 2008, 2009, there were about 100,000 folks who were using it on a regular basis. 2008 was also when I still had a day job. I was an analyst at a hedge fund. My original background was in technology. That's why I felt reasonably comfortable making the software and things like that. But you know, there were kind of a couple of paths that were happening around 2008, 2009. One path was, hey, just keep working at your hedge fund job and do this on the side. But it was clear that something was happening here. And I frankly was having trouble focusing on my hedge fund job. I was getting these letters from folks all over the world on how it was helping them, how it was helping their children. Paths where I could have just kind of gone and become like a YouTube personality. Nothing wrong with that. But I guess it would have been a little bit narrower than free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Another path is I live in Silicon. I eventually moved to Silicon Valley. The firm I was working for moved out here, and some venture capitalists were reaching out and saying, "Hey, let's start a business. We could start a real ed tech business here." And that was intriguing because I could then have the resources to devote all my time. But to your question about what was the inspiration for it being a not-for-profit and free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, I cite a couple of things. I cite the Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, which I first read in the middle school. I'm going to paraphrase. I'm not giving away the book. I highly recommend everyone read the series. It's wonderful on a lot of levels. But the premise is 30,000 years in the future, humanity has colonized the galaxy, and there's a galactic empire, and there's an academic, Harry Seldon, who through his research is able to predict large-scale historical movements through his statistics, economics, math, whatever you want to call it. And he sees that the galactic empire is about to enter into a 10,000-year dark age, very high probability of this happening. And rather sit passively, he decides to do something about it. And so he creates a foundation at the periphery of the galaxy that contains all of humankind's knowledge. And his mathematics show him that by doing that, he's going to be able to shorten the dark ages from 10,000 years of war, of famine, of ignorance to 1,000 years. So the dark ages are going to happen, but he's able to take out 9,000 years. And I remember reading that in 7th grade when I was 12, 13 years old. And it's a wonderful story, but one, it was the first time that it dawned on me that a civilization is not defined by its roads, its bridges, its military. It's defined by what's going on inside of people's minds. If the right things are going on inside of people's minds, the roads and bridges and pillared, architecture will be built. If the wrong things are going on, that stuff will essentially go away. Rights will be crushed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We see some of that going on in the world broadly. Actually, we're seeing that all the time. And also that if you could somehow provide knowledge at scale, that you could, it is perhaps, the biggest leverage point for giving people opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. So that was always in the back of my mind. I also was inspired by the protagonist in the book was thinking on a scale well beyond his own life. And I remember being disappointed as an adult how short-term thinking people were. When you're a kid, you're saying, surely the adults are thinking long-term. No, when you work at a hedge fund, everyone's thinking about the next quarter. That's it. As long as they can optimize that. And so that was one inspiration. Another inspiration, I remember when in the late 90s, MIT, many people, it was obvious that the internet was going to be a way to disseminate knowledge. And a lot of people, that was the first ed tech boom in the late 90s. And a lot of universities were trying to monetize it in some way, create online courses, charge for it, et cetera. And I remember MIT I believe it was in 1999 or 2000, they announced open courseware. And they said, you know what? We think some things are just, it's not about economics, it's just a matter of principle. And as a matter of principle, MIT on its own dime took video cameras into their own classrooms and they started to share everything for free to the world. And I'm an alum, and I remember, a lot of universities try to teach ethics or try to teach values to their students. Very few of them truly live by them. And I remember doing that, which MIT absolutely didn't have to do. No one's putting pressure on them, but for them to put a stake in the ground and to say, while everyone else was trying to monetize, no, we think this should be for free. I found that incredibly inspiring. And when I read that press release in 2000, I was working at a tech startup. It just kind of hit my mind. And then you fast forward to 2008, when I'm thinking about what should this thing become, I think it was the Foundation series. Hey, maybe this could become an institution for civilization. Very grandiose, almost, delusional. But I also thought of MIT OpenCourseWare. And I thought, yeah, if you got one life, if you're going to stand for anything, you might as well, let me take a flyer on this and say, let's see if this could be part of a solution for free world-class education for anyone, anywhere.
Wow. Can I just ask, for you, what is learning then? What is this process of learning? What goes on inside people's minds? I mean, you've mentioned the gaps and how do we fill the gaps, but what's the entire learning process or the model that you see and you're trying to work with?
Yeah, and there's two very related ideas. There's learning and there's education. The learning phenomenon. I fundamentally believe all human beings their default programming is to be, learning machines. If you think about why a 3 or 4 or 2-year-old or even a 1-year-old will throw a tantrum outside of being hungry or sleepy, it's usually because they want to play with something. They want to grab it, they want to explore it, and you're not letting them because you think they're going to break it. Or that is going to be the reason why they literally cry. And they'll have a reaction to not being allowed to explore, not being allowed to learn, very similar to if they were hungry or if they were sleepy, like these very fundamental human things. And I think that's one of the things that differentiates humanity, is that we have that same hunger to explore the universe around us, to understand the context that we're in. At the most base level, that's all learning is. Learning is just trying to connect the dots. We all kind of awoke in this universe and we're trying to make sense of it, and we're trying to form correlations and causality and what connects to what and be able to predict patterns. That at the most fundamental layer is what learning is. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of folks, even though we all have that base programming, it gets into some degree beaten down in certain ways. Other conditioning teaches us not to ask certain questions. Sometimes we tell the kid, hey, you're going to break that. Don't do that. Or even punish them for it. That conditions them in certain ways to not look at something, to maybe think that it's not for them, or they're not going to be good at it. Now, education, I think, is learning. Learning is a big part of it, but it's in service to being able to be a fully actualized person in the universe. And in our world, and that primarily means can you feel a sense of purpose? It could be an economic purpose, but it's really just even purpose for your fellow man, or people or woman, or and then and can you navigate the world either as an individual or help navigate the world reasonably as a collective, especially in a democratic society. If everyone's going to be part of the decision making, you got to make sure that they're all, the critical thinking's there, et cetera, and that you have signals so that you can get that opportunity. So, that's what it is at the most fundamental level.
Nice one. So you're obviously looking at masses of data coming in of learners learning and looking at things over and over again. And I'm going to guess you're adjusting your program accordingly. So you're kind of finding the way that people like to digest their learning the best. Number one, how does Khan Academy allow people to do that? But what's the lessons for schools here and for teachers in terms of what a digestible unit is and how often people need to revisit it or do revisit it?
Yeah, there's at least two use cases for Khan Academy. One is students coming in on their own, oftentimes at the direction of a teacher, and they're trying to fill in gaps. They're trying to understand something. Maybe they're cramming for an exam. But what we hope is, as they do that, they'll discover that, yes, they can hopefully get a video, and we could do fairly short form videos that are bite-sized, and we're trying to make them more bite-sized all the time. Students can get practice. We do it in a mastery learning framework where if you don't understand it at first, we have a very deep item bank, so you can get as much practice as you need in that concept or in that collection of concepts, so that you don't just get an 80% and you move on to the next concept. But we hope as students come in that they get to some degree sucked in to the learning process, and then they can start learning the concepts. Everything we do is accessible, so you can jump in via search, but then it's a full progression, so that you can continue to practice at your own time and pace, get instruction, get practice, do it in a mastery framework. Even though in a lot of common sense, this is the way that you would learn a musical instrument, this is the way that you would learn a martial art, where you keep working on something until you learn it. It's not the way the traditional academic model is structured. Traditional academic model is everyone, and this was a compromise that we kind of had to do in the 18th and 19th centuries, for when we introduced free mass public education, which has been transformational for the world. But the compromise was we applied Industrial Revolution techniques. We batch students together and we move them all together at a set pace. We have some standards that we're going to some processes that we're going to apply to the students on a regular basis, lectures, homework, some in-class activities. Then you get a test after 2 or 3 weeks. On that test, maybe you get a 90%, maybe I get a 70%. And even though that test has identified gaps, and it's probably an imperfect test, the whole class, then the assembly line keeps moving, and it'll move on to the next concept. And that next concept especially in subjects like math, are going to build on those gaps that they just identified. And this process goes on and on and on year after year, and you have these gaps accumulating. And this is why so many students hit a wall when they hit algebra, which is really one of the first courses where you have to apply almost all of the other mathematics that you knew before. You can't kind of know arithmetic and do well in algebra. You can't kind of know negative numbers or exponents and do well in algebra. That has to be fluent for you to have even a chance at understanding the algebra. And then that happens again when you go to trigonometry calculus. If you don't have the algebra mastered, that's going to be even worse. And this isn't me just saying, oh, this might happen. In the United States, 70% of students when they go to college, so these are the students who do everything right. They're graduating from high school, they decide to go to college, 70% of them have to take remedial math. Remedial math in the United States higher education system is 7th grade math. The universities are saying, you have so many gaps, you are not ready yet to learn high school math yet, even though these students have taken 6 years of high school math already. And it's not that they're not bright, it's not that they didn't necessarily have good teachers, it's just that they were forced along, and just the gaps forced them to essentially pattern match things so that they really didn't understand what they were doing.
It's bizarre because I remember when I was at school, we had SMP, which was a scheme not dissimilar to Khan Academy, yes, done through cards and stuff like that, where you kept moving around. It had interleague practice in it. Smile was another one that came out of London. And this all got thrown out. So we were actually possibly on the right tracks there, and suddenly we ended up on a different rail. The problem there was it hit the higher exams and they just went back to traditional teaching. And so therefore you kind of undid it. Just going back to that bite size, what are you understanding by a bite size now? What are you finding from learners is what they're capable of concentrating on, and how small does that morsel need to be, or how chewy does it need to be in order to have the level of engagement it needs, but also to get the learning done quickly or efficiently?
Yeah, a lot of this I kind of fell into it when I obviously when I was making when I was tutoring my cousins, I was doing it in relatively short sessions just by the very nature of tutoring. When I made the first video, I remember I made it like a 20-minute video and YouTube rejected me because at the time they had a time limit. It was a 10-minute time limit. And I was like, oh, how am I going to do this in under 10 minutes? 10 minutes now seems forever on the internet. But at the time it was like, how do you teach math in 10 minutes? And then I was like, oh, well, instead of a 20-minute video, I can chunk that up probably into 2 or 3 minute video, 2 or 3 videos that are each like 7 or 8 minutes. And so I did that, and that was just a YouTube constraint at the time. But what it did is it made me realize that actually that was actually much more natural. Like, so I could label the video, hey, a worked example of factoring a quadratic, or a conceptual understanding of what an imaginary number is. And it made it easier, one, for my cousins to be able to just jump in and just get what they needed. I think the video format also gave them control of pausing, repeating, seeing certain things. There's, transcripting, all that kind of stuff. And then so I kept doing that. And as I mentioned, a lot of other people found this useful. I wasn't the first person to make math videos or science videos on YouTube. I was probably the 500th back in 2006. But I think what people appreciated is I do think I was able to give some of the intuition that served me well in my education, where I was like, why are people memorizing this? This is intuitive. Let me just, make sure they understand it. I think they appreciated that I'm, as you can tell, I'm a very open filter person. So when I was making these videos for my cousins, I would literally do them in real time and say every thought that was going in my mind as I was doing it, which most people you don't get to see what's going on, or the teacher has already done that problem so many times that they're not really doing it in front of you. But I think the other notion was the breadth and the bite size. There was a lot of content and it was bite size. And then later, people started forwarding me research studies like, oh, you must have read all the literature that there were studies done in like the 70s and 80s in colleges where they showed that students were paying attention for about the first 10, 15 minutes of a lecture. Then they would zone out for about 4 or 5 minutes. Then when they zoned back in, they could only pay attention for about 10 minutes. And then they would zone out for a little longer, like now 8 minutes. And that would keep happening. And by the end of the lecture, you're zoning out for 20 and you're zoning in for 2-3 minutes at a time. And I think most of us don't need a research study to tell us that. We all experience that for hours and hours and hours in our education system. Like it's almost like on some level, it's an epiphany. On some level, it's like we lived it. Every single person lived that for years and hours per year. So so we continue to go in that direction. Actually, now we target, if we can do it in 4 or 5 minutes, that's even better. And that, once again, that never means cutting content. If anything, you can add more content because it's an infinite amount of class time. You can just keep adding videos that might be useful for folks. So yeah, we're finding that that's valuable for folks because they can just, watching a video in that form is no longer passive. You're picking the things that you need. It's now more of an active process. And then we're also realizing that if people can do, we're known for our videos, but most of our resources are actually in our problems and all the mechanics to have students working in their learning edge, their zone of proximal development. And there we were realizing that, if students are able to put in about 20 minutes in a session, 20, 30 minutes, that's realistic. And if they're able to do that even 3-4 times a week, it's dramatically growing their learning. We've had 50 efficacy studies, and it grows them 20, 30, 40, 50% more than expected, just by doing 20 to 30 minutes where they're able to do practice at their actual learning edge.
And it's the same in music. It's the same in sport. Those short practice sessions repeated often, seems to be a way forward. Can I move you on to equity? Because obviously it's a subject very dear to your heart. And I know some students are like kind of very motivated to do well academically, and they will do it no matter what. They'll be scrambling over any information to get there. I'm trying to think of those ones though, who perhaps are the ones who didn't eat the marshmallow, ate the marshmallow on the marshmallow test, or are easily distracted for whatever reasons. And I'm just wondering, how do you help them learn about themselves before they're ready to access the knowledge, or do you just feel like it's get them into the knowledge and that takes care of itself?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, and the marshmallow study. One of our Khan Academy team members was actually one of those kids in the marshmallow study, so we had good fun about that. But I don't know if there's a new understanding of the marshmallow study. The original understanding was that these were students who could defer gratification, and the ones that deferred gratification there was a correlation between them doing well. But a new look on it is there were students who trusted, there were kids who trusted adults and kids who did not trust adults. And so what looked like deferred gratification was like you trusted adults, you're going to get 2 marshmallows later on, while the kids who did not trust adults, maybe because of something in their life, and there might be correlations there. But anyway, but your point is well taken. There is this view that it looks like, especially once you start looking at kids when they're 12, 13 years old, or people when they're 20 years old, that some people seem more motivated than other people. I used to also believe that, and I think that is true within certain domains, but I think it's also to some degree a high degree of conditioning on where you've gotten reinforcement, et cetera. I think where Khan Academy's value is, we want to lower the burden, lower the activation energy, lower the frictions. I think if you go back 30 years, a highly, highly motivated student who did not have resources would have to go to their local library, maybe take public transportation, find some old textbooks, and then just try to read those textbooks and see if you could make sense of it. There were probably some highly motivated kids who tried doing that, and either they couldn't get there wasn't a library, the textbooks weren't there, or they just had trouble reading those textbooks. If you think about the world that Khan Academy is introducing and others, we're reducing those frictions. It's now a click away. If you have a phone, we have to work on things like internet equity and things like that. But if you have a device, which is actually far easier to access now, especially in a lot of the middle income countries, and it's happening fast in the developing countries, then with one click, you have access, and that access is much more digestible than what you would have had to do from some kind of a textbook. You have video explanations that are hopefully, as good, and this is the world-class part, as good as you would get, or better as you would get than even if you went to the fanciest prep schools in the world. It's on demand. It's in a mastery learning framework, which again leapfrogs what's happening in even the quote finest schools in the world. You have as much practice as possible. Khan Academy is on an evolution. We're by no stretch I have a list of 200 things I want to do to make the product better, but we dream of making it so it's almost addictive in a good way, that you almost, and there are some students who already do find it addictive and they can't stop and they keep doing it, and they'll do like 5 years of learning in a year, and that's great for them as long as they're also going outside and having friendships and things like that. But how do we do that for more students? So I see us as, how do we just reach more and more and more and more students, make it more and more engaging? I think the biggest blocker for motivation, though, is gaps in your knowledge and feeling like you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to contribute or grasp what's happening. So if you fill in those gaps, I've seen time and time again, almost any student can be incredibly motivated.
We've just done a massive survey, 29,000 schools, and the one thing that came out all about learning, it's the first time I think it's been done in the world, or certainly the biggest one it's been done. The one thing that came out as the big surprise was the whole mistakes and errors thing and how people deal with it. And more than half the kids treat it not as a first attempt in learning, but as a source of humiliation, either from their peers or from their teacher, and therefore then shut off and become closed to learning at that point. So I think, what you're offering there is, insanely useful, because it privatizes that failure, if you like, for a little bit, and so people can get up, do it again without feeling like the eyes of the world are on them. So and much to do. So with that in mind, how could we restructure our education system in our schools to say, look, Khan Academy or the likes of Khan Academy can do a lot of the heavy lifting here, and that would allow schools to get on with a lot of the other areas which perhaps they feel that they haven't got time for at the moment, with being judged through the examination or the external examination results, certainly the teachers perceiving it and the school leaders perceiving it.
Yeah, I would start with the outcomes. I would start with what are the competencies that someone needs in order to be to have purpose, in order to be able to contribute in different domains, or to be able to enter into certain pathways. If we were to focus on the general competencies, and people are into coding and this and that now, and data science. These are hot topics, and those are valuable. And I come from a background of data and a background of coding, so I value those. But I still think the most valuable skills are critical thinking, and mathematics is a proxy for that, can be a proxy for that, although it can still, and then your writing and your reading. And obviously critical thinking is also occurring in your writing and reading. And how do you become, and you need to be excellent at those things, or you need to be, I would say, you need to be reasonably fluent at those things. And so we should define competencies in, say, mathematics or critical thinking. And how do you prove it? And there might be 2 or 3 ways to prove your competency in, say, algebra. To prove your competency in different forms of writing, to prove your competency in critical thinking when you read. And if you're the Minister of Education and you define that for your country or for the world in some way, then the system can create pathways that work, and it's very easy to understand which pathways are working for which students. And then the school system, in conjunction with the Khan Academies of the world, in conjunction with other systems and support structures, can create pathways that get students to those levels of competency. And these are things that mastery learning I view as something that happens almost at the micro scale, and while students are forming their knowledge, formative learning, so to speak, that, hey, I haven't learned it yet, let me keep working on it and I can learn it more. I view competency-based learning as really just that at a bigger scale. Do you know your algebra? Do you know your geometry? Can you program a computer? Can you write a reasonable argumentative essay, et cetera? Can you read a piece of an article and digest it critically, things like that. And then you just have to convince the consumers of the signal that this is a valuable data point. And I'll give a very tangible example, just so where this is going. Khan Academy itself, we created another platform called Schoolhouse.world, which is another not-for-profit. It's the mission statement there is connecting the world through learning. And the whole point is, can we give the world free tutoring, free live tutoring? How do you give free live tutoring in an economic way? Well, what if you could leverage volunteership? And how do you leverage volunteers? Or one, how do you get volunteers? And then how do you vet the volunteers? So getting volunteers, it turns out that a lot of people are willing to be tutors. They love to tutor. They love to connect with other people and help people, especially if they can do it over Zoom, which is how it's done on Schoolhouse.world. But even more, what if becoming a great tutor, if you're one of the most highly rated tutors in the world of statistics, what if that were the credential of the future? That an employer, I've already talked to some of the top employers. I said, hey, if I can show you one of the top tutors in statistics or calculus or whatever it is in the world, why wouldn't you want to hire them? This person is in many ways more impressive than people who've gone to fancy colleges and graduate schools. And
this
then the
is
second
knowledge
question,
mobilization and knowledge
exactly.
transfer, which countries in the world, I was just over in Saudi Arabia, they're just crying out for it because they can send people out, get them there, but then they can't get the transfer.
Exactly. And then how do you vet the tutor? So what we did is we created a mechanism. Khan Academy has unit tests, assessments that get very deep item bank. You're not going to see repeats. We said, well, what if a student takes these assessments while recording their face and the screen and explaining their reasoning out loud. If they get to 90% on that assessment, they take that video, it gets submitted to the Schoolhouse.world community, it gets peer reviewed, and if it looks, there's a rubric and there's a things to do that to make sure they're not cheating. And then but it looks good, thumbs up. That material, and we have a little transcript that says, all right, you now know Unit 3 of Calculus, and it has a video there of you doing it. And now you are ready to begin your tutoring. You're ready to begin your tutoring journey. Now, this is mastery-based, competency-based, and it's starting to lead to opportunity pathways. The University of Chicago and MIT, both very high selective universities, are now putting it on their applications for college admissions, where they realize they see all these kids with great grades, with great test scores, but if they can see students who can actually certify their knowledge and then go on and become great tutors for their peers, these are the students they want to admit. To your point, they know the material, they can communicate, they can empathize, etc. So if I were the Minister of Education, I would actually create a competency-based system where at minimum, how do you prove what you know? And that the highest achievement is that you're able to give back and tutor. And then you create a flywheel. And that's what we're trying to do at Khan Academy and Schoolhouse. But obviously, it would be great to be able to do it with the ministries of education. We're trying. And then I would go to the employers and I'm like, I know right now you've indexed on these historical things like a college degree, et cetera, but and I know that you can find someone who's a math major in college, but you give them a freshman exam 5 years later, they're not going to know any of the material. If I show you a tutor of statistics, that's who you want to hire in your firm. You're just looking for a signal of someone who can communicate, critical thinking skills, et cetera.
Yeah, Stephen Covey, Habit 8. Yeah, I love it. So it sounds like you, as you said, 200 things to do. So I'm just wondering what are the top priorities on that list. Obviously, we've mentioned now a little bit about schoolhouse.com. Sounds phenomenal. I'm really interested in this kind of student collective efficacy. We're seeing a lot of really interesting research in it, but very little enablement of it, if that makes sense. And technology does seem to be the way. You mentioned through tutoring. Have you got any kind of collective learning bit where the pupils are together? Is that something that you've been working on?
A bunch of things. I started Khan Academy almost as like a, I don't want to necessarily use a military, but it's kind of like an Air Force, right? It can cover a lot. Yeah, you can, it's a mothership. Mothership is, and so we're able to reach a lot of folks. And you're right, there are subsets of the world population that are able to, just with Khan Academy, learn a ton. And we have, there's a girl in Afghanistan who spent 6 years on Khan Academy when the Taliban kept her from going to school. Her name's Sultana, and she essentially, through Khan Academy, educated herself to the point where she was able to get asylum in the US and is now a quantum computing researcher. So there are people like that. She highly motivated to your point, but if you give them just a little bit, they run with it. And I have several other stories of someone who was in jail for 18 years, who's now a senior in computer science at Stanford, essentially through Khan Academy. But I realized most students need more support. So that's why we created a lab school almost at the opposite end of the scale spectrum 7 years ago. My kids go there. It's now a K-12 school to show all of these principles in action in a holistic setting where it's, your day. And now we're exploring the Schoolhouse.world, which is kind of in between. We're actually exploring creating a virtual high school, which could scale even larger. So and a lot of our work we're now doing, and this is probably going to be the biggest vector, is working directly with schools and working with school districts. So the lab school and the online high school, that's almost the more experimental laboratory arm. But I think the real value is if we can take Khan Academy and put it together, work with ministries of education, work with school districts, and bring it into classrooms, that's where we're seeing the biggest gains, so that we can work with the system. And every teacher I talk to, they're taught differentiated learning. They're taught mastery learning, but it's very hard to do logistically when you're one teacher with 25, 30 kids. So once they get used to it, there's no turning back. They love learning and teaching alongside the kids this way.
So last year I got to interview Sadhguru. I'm going to talk about meditation in a moment. I don't know whether you've come across his work.
Oh, I'm very familiar.
Right. Okay. That's great then. So he set up his own school. Well, he set up two types of school. One is for teaching, obviously, the meditation process, which he sees quite differently, I think. But the second one was his own school, where within the ashram, where he said that the space was vital, so that the students had space between themselves to run around and to find out about things. And he said, I would teach them nothing until they're at least 12. I'm just wondering, what's your kind of concept of where does that, you mentioned that people come out fighting for knowledge, and their babies are crying for knowledge and to get it. But I'm wondering what point you feel like it should be a more formalized process.
Yeah, I think there's something to the laissez-faire approach, so to speak. I think in my own education, some of my best learning environments were kind of where I was allowed to do what I wanted to do. But I think it is important to have a bit of a framework. If students aren't, there's some of the knowledge that it is valuable to get structured. Khan Academy is a highly structured tool, and our vision for classrooms of the future, we try to do this at our lab school, is that by being able to get that structured learning in a more efficient and mastery-based way, in a more effective way, it frees up more time for the play, for the exploration. I'm doing a big push at our lab school. We just we just leased a new campus that has a big field. We're going to fix the field, and I'm telling the team, the kids should be outside 90% of the time. We live in Northern California, where it's between 60 and 80 degrees 95% of the time. And I said, if it's between 40 degrees and 100 degrees, they should be outside, because it's more stimulating. They have room, same things that Satguru is talking about. I think it's, we obviously evolved being in nature, and most schools were actually designed to almost separate you from that. So for me, it's both. It's an and. You need some of the structure, but if you do it well, it'll be engaging and fun for the kids, and then it can unlock a lot more time for just exploration and being.
So we've got a bit like this jazz concept of, yes, you've got to know the tight structures in order then to free will, be creative, but also be inspired by what's around you. That's cool. Just in terms of your own learning, where do you go for your own learning and stimulate the process? I've heard you talk about meditation. I'd love to know a little bit more about there and how it goes. Well, what else do you learn to keep yourself stimulated, and how do you go about it?
Yeah, well, I think, there's two, for one of my indulgences is my job, which is I still make content. Well, I learn on a lot of levels on my job. What I do find, when I was a kid trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, I said, well, if there was a job called PhD in everything, I would love to do that, because then you just try to understand every field. And part of my job, I still get to do that a bit, where I still make content, and we make content in pretty diverse areas, and I still make videos, and I enjoy being able to geek out with some, you can see some of what I have behind me, or talking to friends about it and trying to understand something intuitively and then seeing if I can communicate that. So that's one area. I think I'm also lucky. I remind myself, even when you manage Khan Academy is much more than me now. We're over 200 full-time folks. We have thousands of volunteers around the world. We have hundreds of thousands of donors. Whenever you're managing complexity like that, it can sometimes be frustrating because things don't happen the way that you hope that they would happen. But then I remind myself that this is a great learning experience. So I'm in the ultimate simulation. I'm lucky to have a job where I can make mistakes and then course correct and learn about human organization and learn how to motivate, learn how I can be a better leader, a better manager, a better supporter, et cetera, et cetera. So I always, whenever I'm having trouble coping with something, I always remind myself it's a learning opportunity, right? It would be boring if I had it all figured out. And I think, meditation is something that's been part of that learning journey, where it was actually I started doing it because I got claustrophobic on planes. I still do. And one of my board members suggested that I meditate, but it's just unlocked a whole world for me, where it just makes you appreciate. I don't want to get too metaphysical here, but it makes you appreciate what you are and what you are not. You are this awareness. That's all. That's like the only truth that you can really fundamentally say, that you are aware. And I think when you're able to have a vantage point like that, then a lot of the things that we human beings tend to get very worked up about tend to lose their energy and tend to lose their importance. And you start to realize that even your mind is not necessarily you, and that to some degree you have to train your mind. And when you take when you are able to abstract your awareness from your mind, even a little bit. I don't live like this all the time. Sadhguru might live a little bit more like this on a perpetual basis. It actually allows your mind to do better work. It keeps you from ruminating. It gives you, and frankly, it just allows you to live in the present and enjoy reality much more. And it's a learning journey. Every now and then, when I think I figured it out, there's a curveball, and you have to. A little bit more meditation, a little bit more reflection about how I am as a husband, as a father, as a manager, as a lead, whatever it might be. But I always remind myself this is a learning journey. We're in the ultimate mystery, and it would be boring if we had it figured out.
I love the way that you've got to feel it. You can't think it. And that's just an extraordinary challenge, particularly when you're working intellectually so much of the time. It's phenomenal. I'm just doing a bit on outer dissolving at the moment, and it's just watching things disappear. It's just kind of crazy, but really cool. I'm just going to give you one last question, which is the question we're asking everyone at this particular summit. If you're looking on the horizon, on the educational horizon, we're coming out of this post-COVID world where people have been locked together. There's all sorts of other challenges to the planet. But where would you say some green shoots that you'd like to nurture in terms of on that horizon that you've spotted and you think, this is really important for the world of education, for children, for the future of the planet?
I think, something like Schoolhouse.world, I hope, is a green shoot. It could have happened before the pandemic. We thought about doing that forever, but when the pandemic hit, we said now or never. And if we can scale this up, and it is scaling, it's several thousands of students now. I hope it can be millions. I hope it gets to tens of millions or hundreds of millions, so it gets the same scale as Khan Academy. We will have a way that literally everyone should be able to get all the supports they need in order to learn. And eventually, we'll do it in all the languages. We just announced, Khan Academy is in 50-something languages now. Schoolhouse.world, inadvertently, there started to be sessions in Hindi and in Spanish and in other languages. No reason why that can't scale up. So I hope that's a green shoot. I hope we're going to start seeing in the next 5 years alternative ways that are close to free that anyone in the world can learn through Khan Academy, Schoolhouse, other resources, MOOCs, whatever, prove what they know, maybe by tutoring other people or maybe other forms of evidence. And then they get opportunity. They get into college. They get scholarships. They get internships. They get jobs. I think you're going to see that full tilt in 5 years. We have some projects. One of my dreams is in the next 5 years, you're going to be able to get at least maybe the first year of college for free in a competency-based world, leveraging Khan Academy that can be transferred. I hope in 10 years you can get the first 2 years, or even better, you can get all of the core knowledge that any employer would consider important for free. Now,
vice chancellors across the world quaking in their boots.
Well, they don't have to quake. They don't have to quake. They just have to think about the value that they are delivering, which I think can be. I still want my kids to go to a residential campus and experience it and make friendships and all of that. But then it allows those campuses to say, okay, what are we optimizing here? And why are we making these kids sit in 300-person these dehumanizing lecture halls and taking notes? That's not and they're actually not even going, right? Like the kids are already not going to those things. Let's make them form connections, healthy connections, not just things that occur at fraternity parties and who knows what, but real connections that are happening. How do we facilitate that? How do we form friendships? How do we make people find? Right now, a lot of campuses pride themselves in diversity, but then everyone connects to just the people that they're comfortable with. How can the campuses engineer so that, no, you're going to meet the people that you're not comfortable with? You're going to be able to get more exposure. These are interesting questions, and I think if you just put some energy, the campuses are primed to do it. But I also want to be clear that doesn't have to be the only pathway, because globally, especially in the United States, it's an incredibly costly pathway in both time and money and resources. And I think there need to be multiple pathways, and there shouldn't be a hierarchy between them. If you want to be a doctor, you can go this way, or you could go that way, and you can still be a doctor.
And you can come back around the back end when you're in your 60s, because it's all there available for you, I guess. Sal, it's been absolutely phenomenal talking to you. We've had Sir Michael Barber on today, and he said educationalists were lacking ambition. I don't think anyone could ever accuse you of that. I mean, it's just brilliant to hear the journey, but also where it's going to go to. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom on World Education Summit this year.
Thanks for having me.